40 years ago, this very month, the Union Cabinet had given the green signal to the proposal mooted by Maruti-Suzuki, then owned by the government, to manufacture small-sized cars in collaboration with the Japanese auto giant Suzuki. The vision was simple: to develop a car for the masses at a price that the masses can afford. 14 December 1983 marked the birth of the iconic Maruti 800. Priced at 47,000 rupees initially, it went on to become one of the most successful cars in India's history and paved the way for an automobile revolution. It has been a long journey for Maruti-Suzuki since then. 4 decades later, the company, India's largest car maker and the world's 4th largest, boasts of 16 models with over 150 variants. It's exported over 2.38 lakh cars in the last fiscal. In short, the journey of Maruti-Suzuki has been the journey of the Indian automobile industry. In fact, the Indian manufacturing industry. The country now exports over 6 lakh cars annually to more than 100 countries. What does the future augur for India's largest car maker? What strategy has helped it withstand competition for the last 40 years? What can we talk about? The success story of Maruti-Suzuki. Joining me now is a man who's been integral to the Maruti-Suzuki journey, the chairman, R.C. Bhargava. Mr. Bhargava, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. It's good to have you back in person, and congratulations to you and everyone at Maruti. 40 years. Who would imagine this, Mr. Bhargava? 40 years ago, no one would have given Maruti-Suzuki a chance, given the fact that it was a public sector company largely, which got into a joint venture with the Japanese automaker. India did not have a car market. India was not known for its manufacturing prowess. And yet, here we are today, the world's 4th largest car maker.
You're absolutely right, Shireen. At that time, there were only voices of gloom and doom about the future of Maruti. When I had to take a decision whether to leave the IAS or not and join Maruti, everybody told me, don't be a fool, there is no future in Maruti. 100,000 cars, forget it, can't happen in India. And everybody from government downwards, and even in Suzuki, they said, let's start with 40,000 cars capacity. We'll go up to 100,000 when the time comes. And there we are, we ran short of capacity for every year. During the next 10, 15 years, there was never enough capacity. Yeah. I think nobody understood the potential of India, what the people in India really wanted, and what could be done if there was a true partnership between a country like Japan, which had all the technology and experience on competitive manufacturing, and a country like India, where we are very good learners, we have a high intellect capacity, and we could easily pick out all the strong points of the Japanese system and translate them so that they became applicable to India. And I think that's why today we stand where we are.
You know, you talked about the unmistakable thirst in the market for a product like a small car that Maruti-Suzuki put onto our roads. But you know, many companies have tried and many companies have failed in the manufacturing sector. I'm not just going to restrict myself to the automobile sector, because the story of Maruti-Suzuki goes beyond India's auto industry. It's a story about Indian manufacturing as well. Yeah. This takes me back to a conversation that you and I had when you launched your book, where you were frustrated about why India hasn't been able to leverage the advantages that it could enjoy as far as manufacturing is concerned. I remember you talked about how our share has been stuck at about 16% of GDP, whereas countries like Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand had gone much beyond that. So if I were to ask you today to look back, what was it about the Maruti way that ensured that you actually got the manufacturing story right? I mean, how much of that was the Suzuki contribution? How much of that was the Maruti management as well as the government of the time to say, look, let's make this happen?
I think it was a combination of all three. There was a lot of learning from Suzuki, learning on low-cost manufacturing, a focus on the customer, which is not a strong point in India at all. The whole planning process was not customer focused. And the ability of the Indian management to understand what was being done in Japan and how it could be done in India. The trust which was between Japan and the Indian management. Mr. Suzuki entered this country not because he studied the car market and was aware that it was a very good market to work in. There were no components even in India at that time. He entered India because he met Mr. Krishnamurthy and me. And he said afterwards that I felt I could work with you two guys. That's why I decided to come here. That's all. It's a personal kind of chemistry which developed, which led him here. And I think in the beginning years, the government gave us free rein to do what we wanted to do. We had to work within the public sector constraints. But despite that, we made a number of innovations. And I think the answer to what you asked about the success of Maruti versus the rest of industry, where I was frustrated, was because we brought in a different manufacturing system, a different supply chain development system, a different relationship with workers and management. And I think those are the key points which I think we should focus on when we look at the next 25 years. Because India's whole environment, our social, economic environment is not like America. We cannot follow what the Americans have done or even British people have done on industry. In any case, there is no manufacturing industry worth anything there. I think we have to develop our own ways, and I think that way has to be based on learning, which we have done from Japan.
You know, you talked about building out the ecosystem, whether it was the supply chain, you know, setting up the component hub and so on and so forth. Manesar today is what it is on account of Maruti and Maruti's contribution. But since we're talking about the last 40 years as well as now the bridge to the next 40, 50 years, if the focus was on making sure that cars were affordable, making sure that it was low maintenance, making sure that it was high on mileage. I mean, kitna deti hai became synonymous with Maruti. What do you believe will now need to change? Because India is a very different country today. India is more aspirational. The middle class is certainly bigger. It's a younger demographic as well that you're trying to address. What will need to change about the way that Maruti was positioned to what it is likely to be positioned in the future?
I think what has happened now, India has developed into two very distinct market segments. There is still the old market segment which existed when Maruti came in, because with 200 odd million two-wheeler owners who are going to upgrade whenever they can to four-wheelers, that market for a low-cost, affordable car is going to be a very important segment for the country's development. After all, these 200 million people, the 20 million people who come and buy scooters every year, they have to have a better form of transport, a safer, more convenient form of transport. But as you rightly said, India has moved on in many ways. And there is this other market, which is as sophisticated, as affluent as any market anywhere in the world. And they want cars which give everything which they can get if they go to Europe or they go anywhere else. They want the same kind of cars. So what will change now is not just concentrating on small cars as we had done, but we have to cater to two markets.
You know, speaking of catering to these two markets, I think one of the things that has worked very well for Maruti, and I think you alluded to that, is this global strategy, where you got the global technology, global learnings, global manufacturing prowess, and were able to converge and marry it with a local understanding and, of course, frugal innovation and engineering, etc. But this local understanding matched with global technology, why do you think this worked so well in Maruti's case and hasn't necessarily worked that well in other segments? I mean, if you just talk about the auto sector, there are very few foreign car makers left today in the country.
Well, nobody has really been successful except for Hyundai. And I think one of the reasons was, of course, many of them did not come with a small car. At that time, when they came 20 years ago, it was still small car dominated. The other part is that they stuck with the management systems of the West. And they did not bring in, even the Japanese people who came to India, did not change the management system, the labor thing, because they stuck with the Indian managers who only knew the Indian system. Suzuki did this wise thing of training our managers and exposing them to the Japanese system. And that's why we could transition from the traditional management to a different management. I think the management in Indian environment with the Indian workers, Indian politicians, and everything makes a huge difference on how it works.
Yes, I would imagine it makes a big difference. But what is the aspiration now? I mean, you know, in terms of exports, in terms of putting India on the global map, this is one of the few brands that is synonymous with the India story. But do you see in the future, over the next 10 to 20 years, a bigger focus, a much more sort of committed push to push exports?
I think, Shireen, we have almost unlimited potential going ahead in expanding the car market. I think the domestic market must grow much faster. Last years have seen a decline in the rate of growth. You know, we've come down to virtually nothing. And that has to change. And I think if the volume of cars grow from here, production grows in India, and let's say we reach 10 million cars in the next 7 or 8 or 10 years and grow at 10, 12% a year, I think our domestic sales apart, I think the global market will offer us extraordinarily large opportunities to export, both for ICE cars to some of the developing countries like Africa and the Middle East, and even EVs to other countries. If not full EVs, at least large parts of the EV system from here. Because Indian manufacturing is going to be the most efficient, low-cost manufacturing. Our workers, our engineers, our IT guys, they're so good.